Hello Orchid friends, welcome back to my channel. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day, staying healthy and staying safe. Today we're going to look at my Phalaenopsis bellina, and the cultivar of this one is the wild form. In Asia we call it the fire form. Okay, so this orchid initially had a old spike from last year, but this year that spike didn't do anything, and then it started to bloom from its new spike. This year it actually gave me a total of 3 flowers, and the video clip here is only to show you its first bloom, but then also for me to document that I actually observed some root tip dieback, and that also contributed to the later repot, which I'll go into with more details later. So this orchid is in the moss no drainage hole method, and before this method I think this orchid was in semi-hydro, which was doing fine, but all of a sudden I just decided that the roots wasn't growing the way that I wanted to in that setup, so I needed to use a different method. And at the time, quite a few orchids in the moss no drainage hole setup were doing really good, so I wanted to get this orchid to produce more roots, so that was the method I used. And after I put this orchid into the moss no drainage hole method, it responded quickly with lots of root production from existing roots, from the plant itself. Roots were just growing, and it was also producing a new flower spike at the time. So it was really good sign. I was really happy that I decided to change a method. And then it started to, mature the bud. So during that time, I actually did not do anything other than watering this orchid and providing the necessary fertilizer, etc., etc. And as it started to open, I noticed that the leaves starting to have that obvious streaks, or I guess, wrinkles. And I think that this orchid was somehow getting dehydrated. So I started to look for signs and try to look around and see if there's anything I did, incorrectly. And basically, what I noticed is that, I still provide the same amount of water, and the frequency didn't change, so obviously something went wrong, and everything all led to basically, the root system was probably struggling inside the media. But because this orchid was still growing a second bud, I just didn't feel that was the right time to repot, so I waited until the second bud matured and opened to do the repot. So that period was kind of a difficult period for me, because I know that this orchid needed repot, but then another part of me was like, I really want to see this orchid bloom, and because it's giving me another bud, so I really wanted to wait and see if that bud would also mature and open, because I just love bellina's smell. And by the way, I have this wild form, but then the one next to it is the regular cultivar, the regular typical Phalaenopsis bellina that most people see. I had them side by side. They were blooming. They had some overlapping in their blooming cycle. Anyway, back to this orchid. Finally, after a couple weeks, the second bud opened, and I was able to enjoy 2 flowers and the fragrance. So that after a few days, I decided, okay, it's time. So I basically took it out of the pot and cleaned out the roots. Thankfully, the root system didn't look too bad. It did have some dieback, so I trimmed them off, and I still have enough root system to work with. And because at the time I'd run out of sphagnum moss, so I decided to use inorganic media. So that's what I did. I repotted this orchid back to the inorganic media, except this time I have drainage holes at the bottom. So this is just a traditional setup with inorganic media, and the pebble ratio is about 1:1. This is right after the repot, that's why there are still some water on the leaves. I did use a paper towel to dry off the stem area so that there is no water trap in between leaves, and so the stem is dry, so there's no risk of stem rot. But then the water on the leaf, it'll evaporate really quickly. But because I used double cup, there would be another same size of transparent cup as the outer cup. So I double cup it because I sometimes like my orchid to go between semi-hydro and traditional setup, depending on whether there is any small amount of excess water at the bottom, which would then get into the inner cup through the drainage hole. So this is what this orchid looked like after the repot. And after that, I put this orchid immediately on the windowsill because it was a sunny day, and I was soaking this orchid because, well, it was having signs of dehydration, so I wanted to let the existing root to be able to absorb enough water. So I soaked it for a good half day, maybe about 5 hours, 5-6 hours. And then the third bud after the repot still happened. It was a surprise because I didn't think that this orchid would actually produce any more buds after the second flowers went away, but it did. So this is actually a very nice bonus. And I know some of you may say that I have always said that don't introduce water at least for a week after the initial repot. Yes, typically that's exactly what I do. But because this orchid was dehydrated, and it has enough roots, so I wanted to make sure that it had enough water. And then 2 weeks after that soaking, I didn't give it any water, just so that it would have an opportunity to get acclimated to the new media, etc. And it did really well. And this is a month after the repot. It was growing a new leaf. The flower, the third bud, the third flower was still there, although it was on its way out. But the leaves are perky now. It's pretty strong. It was no longer droopy. And you can see that there are a couple of new root tips growing. So this orchid was definitely looking very good, much better than before. And I'm hoping that this orchid will continue to produce more roots so that it will basically get established in this current setup. And if everything goes well, this orchid should continue to produce a couple more leaves for this cycle, and hopefully it will bloom again next year. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!